Hey, are y'all ready? How y'all doing? Welcome to the first installation of Mike. Yay. Yeah. So today we have Chandler, Max, Armand, and Steph, and my name is Vielka. This is just making sure the audio is working, everything's good.
It's the behind the scenes, what you get when you go on the Patreon and donate.
Yeah, no, literally. Literally. What's something that y'all did this weekend? We know Steph had a birthday. Birthday bash that happened. How was that, Steph?
It was fun. It was surprising. It was exhilarating.
Was there a theme?
It was Get Funky.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Because apparently October 5th is also National Get Funky Day. I don't know.
Wow. Where are people getting these holidays from?
I don't know.
I
think it might be made up, but also it worked.
Nice. I love that. Or how are those pea sets? I feel like you're really dressed for it.
Oh yeah.
You can't see Armand right now. Armand's like in a navy blue tux. Yeah.
So Max is like, I wore the suit Friday, and Max is like, you should wear that for the podcast. I was like, sure thing. I love a good dressing up moment.
Yeah, you're out dressing all of us.
Yeah, I wish I got a heads up on here.
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good.
What about you, Chandler? How was your weekend?
It was good. I actually went to a concert on Friday. Yeah, so that was fun. It was in Brooklyn.
What concert was it?
It's my friend's roommate who's a drummer.
Okay, cool.
For this girl named Hannah, and so we went to see her. And so
nice.
It was nice. Yeah.
Hannah.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. I'm gonna have to check them out after.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, perfect. Let's get into the intro. So, Mike, Music Industry Club at Columbia, is teaming up with WKCR to showcase voices in music and the music industry from within the Columbia community. Our hope is to showcase some of the extraordinary talent of our community while also providing an educational resource for current students to learn about success stories and paths available to them. As always, our mission is to support, educate, connect, and empower students to pursue their aspirations in music, and we are very excited to be launching this podcast with a very special guest today. Episodes will be airing weekly on Thursday nights. Today joining us is Stephanie Chow, a true multidimensional powerhouse in music. Stephanie is a guitarist, songwriter, producer, engineer, and performer, among other attributes. Has been working in the industry since her sophomore year and is currently based at Spotify. She is also co-president of Bacchanal, as well as a founding member of Mike. We are super excited to have her on as our first guest and can't wait to get into hearing about her experience and insights into music and the music industry as a Columbia student.
Thanks for having me, Max.
Thank you for being here, Steph.
Yeah, we're so excited. So Steph, I don't know, tell us about yourself. I mean, I feel like we all know who Steph is, but for all the listeners out there who don't know who Steph is, what's your pitch?
Okay, so I'm a senior at Columbia right now. I grew up in a small town in Illinois called Normal. It was very cornfield, kind of semi-rural, but also a college town. So I grew up around music. I grew up playing classical piano, and then I played Guitar Hero with my brother and was like, I want to play that. Like, that's fun. How hard could it be? It turns out it was very hard.
Yeah.
And so, I'm still working on it on guitar to this day. And now that's kind of my primary instrument. But along with that, I picked up drums and bass and got into music production and songwriting. And I knew that in college, I wanted to be somewhere where I'd be around a lot of musicians and a really thriving music scene. And so that led me to New York and to Columbia. And also with guitar, my background is primarily in jazz.
Nice.
Which made New York a super, super natural choice. And then I got to Columbia and I was playing, and I'm a philosophy major. And so that was, my academic focus, but I knew I wanted to have that kind of integrate and intertwine with my creative interests. So I was, taking a lot of classes that were humanities oriented, but also dipped into, arts and creative expression. And as I was, performing and gigging, I found myself also continually interested by the music business side of things, the things that, how is it that we go about putting art out there and making sure voices are heard? And how is it that, all these musicians in New York are scraping out their livings? Because I would meet people who, were a few years out of college, and I saw that they were gigging, but then they would also do session work, or they would be maybe on the booking side and working at a venue. And it seemed like everybody who was making a living in music was, having all these different kinds of hustles or having a different ways of approaching music in order to be able to express themselves creatively, but still make a living or balance, a 9 to 5 with gigging at night. And I just became sort of immersed in all these different ways of approaching music. And I realized that I wanted to kind of learn more about the behind the scenes facet as well. So I started interning at a nonprofit called Women in Jazz organization, which had / maybe has still a show through WKCR, and that's actually how I met them. And then after that, I interned with a boutique jazz record label called Artist Share, and then AWOL, which is was an independent label and now has been acquired by Sony Music. And then this past summer and now I'm working at Spotify in sort of artist relations stuff.
Wow, that is a long that's a long history. That sounds really cool, Steph. Yeah, so like why did you I don't know, I want to go back to the Guitar Hero because I feel like I also had that phase where I was like jamming out to like all the metal music and like Paramore on Guitar Hero. And I was like, dang, this is so cool. So like out of all those instruments that you were exposed to, why'd you pick guitar?
I think I picked guitar because I could hear it so much in popular music. Obviously piano was there as well, but my exposure had been just through classical. But with Guitar Hero, like I could immediately hear, you know, these lines and these melodies and like sort of feel like the rhythm of them. Obviously Guitar Hero is nothing like the real thing, but there is something like kind of like I could grasp what it would feel like to be like playing these songs on an instrument in a really tangible way.
It's like gymnastics, like with your like mind and your fingers. Yeah, it's really cool.
And it felt like a little like I don't know, like a little teaser. And so then when I picked up guitar, I knew immediately like okay, I could play this song and this song and this song. And it felt like a really immediate way to start playing the music that I already liked to listen to.
Yeah.
What were some of the first few songs that you tried to play on the guitar?
Let's see. I really liked AC/DC when I was a kid.
Nice.
So like Back in Black was a big like aspirational goal. When I started, I was like, okay, I want to learn how to play that song. And like Hotel California, very like classic rock. And then I started kind of veering into jazz as I got older and listening to more of those records.
Yeah, nice. So I wanted to talk about that like transition from like small town rural to then big city New York. You know, did you feel as if that transition was huge for you, or did you feel like coming to New York made it easier, more accessible for you to get connected to the music scene out here? Like, are there some challenges you faced along the way?
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely huge culture shock coming to New York from like a smaller town and also being in like the college setting. I think I very gradually sort of introduced myself to the music scene here. I was on campus a lot freshman year, and I was just trying to get used to just being at school before going out into the city. But one thing that was really lucky is that the sort of like young jazz world was super, super small. And so I went to a couple of camps and sort of like honor performance things in like LA and in Florida. And so a lot of the people who I would meet at like say like the like NAFME jazz band or like the like USC's Grammy camp were people who ended up coming to New York for jazz because it was pretty much either like New York or LA.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of friends surprisingly who were in the city when I got there around the same time, and we were all kind of figuring out, you know, our paths. And so that made it a little bit less frightening too. I saw a lot of people in my same position coming from like, you know, random cities in the Midwest or wherever, and just trying to, you know, forge their own way.
Nice. Are you still playing jazz right now?
I am. I'm not playing as much right now because I'm really, you know, honed in on the music production stuff and bacchanal and trying to, you know, cultivate the music industry stuff on campus. But that's definitely like always the grounds of where my interests are, and I was just playing it before I came here. So yeah, I still
nice.
still am playing it.
So how's the music production like? You have a stage name, right?
Yes. My stage name is Wilchai. And right now I've been more so producing for other people, not working on my like personal artist stuff, but I'm hoping that'll change in the coming months, and that I'll have some releases coming out soon. But yeah, production is really fun because I feel like I can really unify all the things about music that I like. The performance aspect, because I'm a lot of times producing stuff that I'm doing the like session instrumentals for, so like guitar or bass or piano, I'm usually playing that stuff. But then I can also kind of have an analytical approach with, you know, tracking and like working together with other people. I always love working with other people in music, and sometimes the performance stuff can be a little bit isolating because it's like you gig around and you play and you record, But if you're not playing like with a band regularly, it can be sort of like you're just always looking for a different opportunity or a different place to play, and there's not as much of a feeling of being like really settled. Whereas like I have my little home studio, quote unquote, in my dorm room in EC, and I just can go there and crank out tracks, and it's a very like it's a very comfortable I think, way.
You're like in your own space. You know?
Yeah. It's very therapeutic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a bit about that experience of performing in the city as a kind of like jumping onto different gigs. Because I know you've had experience performing at like Terminal 5 and Hall of Williamsburg, and if you'd like to speak to like that experience a bit and performing as a freelance guitarist.
Yeah, it's definitely. I'm really glad that I've gotten all that experience, and the funny thing is like I started doing the sort of freelance guitar gigs kind of in the midst of COVID, and I was in an apartment with my friends, and when I say like gig, I wasn't playing in front of like, large crowded crowds in cramped places that were like super, not COVID friendly. When I say like gigging, I mean like we played in the park on like 90th and busked for tips. And everybody was, going on their like social distancing walks. And so we would all just like have our masks, and it was like kind of awkward and unwieldy, but we would, play like jazz standards and stuff, and people would tip us. And then once things started opening up, I started playing at Gertrude, which is this wonderful coffee shop on like 90th that still does a lot of jazz every Sunday. And then the people who I would be playing with in the park, started getting back into gigging, and then they would call me to sub in or to play at various shows in like the Lower East Side or Chinatown. And it really became like a word of mouth thing. You play with somebody and then you meet more people at the gig, and then, you really like seeing their music. And it's a very, like, I think I was expecting it to be much more cutthroat, but people are really genuinely interested in just playing with as many different people as possible and just kind of sharing the love in that way. So it's been a really great way to like meet people and to kind of get a lay of the land of like what it feels like to be a performer and what, the landscape of these different venues are. Yeah. It's really fun.
Yeah. Well, how would you speak to like, this whole idea of, I guess, coming to New York and networking to find like music people? Is it as easy as going up to someone and being like, hey, let's jam? Or do you think there's like more of like a process to it? Like, do you think that people have to really come up with experience? Because I remember there's this one time I was in Tompkins Square in the Lower East Side, and I had my little guitar, and I went up to this jazz band, and I was like, y'all are playing jazz? I can play some chords. And that was like way before I knew that, no, there's like standards that you have to know for jazz. You can't just improvise with these people. But yeah, could you speak a little more on that? Like, how would you describe like the situation of just coming into a place, especially with little experience?
Yeah, I think it can be really, really intimidating. And I also think that there's kind of the unfortunate fact that jazz can be particularly exclusive and like male dominated. And that combined with like the repertoire, like the standards you're talking about, being sort of this like not barrier to entry, but like that's sort of like the first thing that people ask you about. There are scenes in the jazz world in New York that can be really like very exclusionary and not beginner friendly. Just because the people are really, really just super serious about their craft. And to the extent that, they don't want to play if they don't feel like you're one of them, which is unfortunate. And also kind of a reason why I've been diving into other genres as well, just because even though I really love jazz itself, sometimes the like process of like going out and sitting in a session or getting a gig and the politics of like picking people to play on your gig or being picked, it can get kind of just like exhausting.
Yeah.
And so I think the thing I've found is that like I'm going to gravitate towards the spaces where I feel really welcome and where I just feel like the people are nice regardless of how good they think you are. And I think there are lots of spaces like that in New York, and it's just a matter of like finding people who will meet you where you are. And like I've talked to my friends, and there's always sort of this like, oh, would you play with somebody if they're really good but they're not like someone you be like friends with? And my sort of like gradual realization is like it's never worth it to play with somebody no matter how good they are if they're just like not a good person, and you wouldn't like hang out with them regardless of how their talent. And so I think a lot of it is just about like learning how to work with other people
Mm-hmm.
and like be like just a solid, understanding person. And that really paves the way for any kind of collaboration.
Yeah.
I know that it's been exclusionary probably for a long time because I had a mentor. His name was Dan Miller, and he just passed away, rest his soul. But he even talked about stories where when he was going out and gigging for the first time, he didn't know a standard, and the drummer, who is I think they're very protective of their craft because jazz is diminishing and blah blah blah. But still, the drummer picks up a cymbal and tosses it at him, and he went home and he practiced a lot after that day. But still, that's just a negative experience that could leave such a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths.
Yeah, have y'all seen what's that one movie with
Whiplash.
the jazz Whiplash?
Yeah, Whiplash.
Yeah. Like I guess like wait, Armand, are you also a music major?
No.
Okay, yeah, but you have like experience in kind of yeah. Would y'all say that like that movie kind of portrays like the experience of like wanting to be like an aspiring musician, but then like feeling this pressure of like just everyone around you and like these high expectations? Or was that like a over dramatization?
I guess really in a certain way, yes. I've never had people smack me, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
But so in that way, and I've read a lot of people say that's over dramatization online, at least. But there are people even in high school, and I was in my high school jazz band. They're practicing hours a day, and I'm like, chill. This is one class, But they're very serious, and that's great for them. It's just that you even felt a little, you felt the click, I think, and that's something that is captured in the movie. Like jazz is very exclusionary sometimes. It's very serious.
Yeah, I think Whiplash definitely captures like elements of like the struggle. I think kind of fetishizes it a little bit, because like especially
like normalizes it too, right?
Yeah, like the drummer in that movie is like sitting alone practicing his like double time swing for like 2 hours, but like the drummers are like inherently like supposed to be band leaders and like playing with other people. So like realistically, it would have been like him doing that for like a quarter of the time that he actually does in the movie, and then the other 3/4 is like trying to go around to sessions and play with people. And like I think it totally missed out on the like social aspect of it, which can be equally as intense. But I think that kind of got cut out.
How's New York been for y'all in that sense? Like, or not even New York, but also just like Columbia. Like, has it been like that environment of exclusion? Like, do you find it easy to go up to groups or people and be like, "Hey, let's jam, let's go perform at Terminal 5," or has it been more of a space where you have to kind of push yourself out there more because of the exclusionary factor?
I think I found people at Columbia are really interested in music and interested to explore. Honestly, I think the hardest part is just like finding the time and the space.
Yeah.
But I think people are generally like, really interested in music and the arts, and I think there's people coming in at a lot of different like points of the journey. Like some people are starting out, some people have been playing for a really long time, and that's like something that is honestly really, really nice. And like you wouldn't get that at a conservatory.
Yeah.
And I think that like really brings a lot more perspectives to the table in terms of like, what kinds of music people are willing to play. And like, I feel like you can engage in it in a lot of different levels. It's just a matter of like, finding the time, finding the space, and finding the resources. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I feel like speaking to that, like the element of space. Did you guys see the recent article from Spec about?
Oh yeah, like how there's not a lot of space, like performing art spaces to practice in. Yeah.
Right. And I guess because Stephanie, you've been here for almost 4, like three and a little bit years now. Would you say like that was a thing that you encountered a lot as well, like trying to practice with people and meet people and perform?
Yeah. I think finding like a space for like a band is like one of the hardest things to do here.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember like what we would do. Usually it would be like somebody has a swipe to a certain
someone who
room,
knows this person who knows this person,
and then this room that you're maybe not supposed to be in. I'm not gonna say what room it is, but and you end up playing there because it's like one of the few places with a drum set and a bass amp and a guitar amp and mics all in one place. Or KCR.
Yeah.
My freshman year, I would have some rehearsals in KCR as well. And yeah, I mean, they're in the process of renovating the party space, and that's going to be like a supposedly like performance like venue essentially by next year, which is really amazing. And I think that'll like, if they, set it up in a way where people can just book time and play, and it's not like something that's guarded heavily like Miller Theater, that would be amazing. And that seems like a step in the right direction. But yeah, right now it's definitely really hard.
Yeah.
Is there a discrepancy between like spaces for practicing, like for grad students or undergrads? Because I know there's certain performing arts spaces that you can practice in, but you either have to be like studying music or concentrating in music, or you have to be like in the grad program. So do y'all think there's like discrepancy between where access is allocated?
Yeah, I think for sure, like, especially if you're a music concentrator or major, there's a lot more areas open to you, like the jazz, like Dodge 112 in the music hall, in the music building is open. Also, Carmen Basement, also CMC on 125th Street is open to anyone taking a class in that area. And those are like some great options that are only open to specific people. So I think for sure.
Where did y'all practice again? I know Steph said WKCR in undisclosed place. What about you, Armand?
I would practice and bother my neighbors in my dorm, and like that's where we'd collaborate. Anytime I had people say, "Hey, you want to like just on a Friday night, you want to like mix up in the studio?" And it's like, "Oh, it's your dorm," but just fun. It's cool, but like it does stink that Columbia, like a place as prestigious as this, doesn't have a place where we could just jam pretty easily. Yeah.
No, totally.
And Steph, how's your experience been now that you're producing for other people? How's that been in terms of making those social connections and also finding spaces to, make music? I'm assuming because it's not necessarily like a band type situation where you're jamming with people, it may be a little bit easier, but how's that been for you?
Yeah, it's definitely much more flexible. I took this really, really great class. It was actually over the COVID year, so it was like totally, for the most part, on Zoom, except a couple times I went to 125th to the CMC, but with Seth Cluett, and it was recorded sound, and usually that's like miking, and it's a very like tactical in-person like or tactile tactile in-person, like you're using mics, you're wiring stuff, you're learning how to like deal with like the dimensions of the room. But because it was totally online, he basically adapted it into like a bedroom recording practices, like how to like build a studio in your home and make things sound good no matter like what kind of equipment you had. So I really I learned a lot from that class and kind of adapted my own little setup that's pretty mobile, and I can get most things tracked through there. And then also for once I need like I can track like guitar, bass, and percussion in my little room. But then if I want to get like really crisp vocals and like a kit, then I'd go to like a studio like 125th or downtown at like, there are some of these studios like the Cutting Room or the Engine Room that are pretty classic, like reputed recording studios that have pretty good rates, and also a lot of younger people like NYU students or even like Columbia students like Gloria Way, who like have done apprenticeships there. And so you kind of like find your studios where you can cut tracks when you need it.
Yeah, and Gloria too, I've seen like the behind the scenes of like the bathroom studio, that whole idea of like the studio being mobile and like any space can be a studio.
I think it's a really valuable skill, even if you like, even though now I'm we're back in person and I'm in a class at CMC, so I can use that space. I still like find myself wanting to record things from my room because I have an idea that hits at like 2 a.m. or something, and I think that's like a really valuable way to just like enable your own creativity.
Can I ask really quickly? So you talked about your guitar and instrument background. Where did you learn to produce? Because I feel like maybe more recently we have a lot of courses online and YouTube videos and such, and that's where I look to. But you're a great producer, it seems like, from checking out your work. Yeah. So where did you learn that?
Yeah, it was a lot of YouTube videos. I like played around in GarageBand a lot in just like middle school. And yeah, it was honestly like a mix of just YouTube, and then I shadowed an engineer in my hometown for a summer before I came to Columbia, and that was like really, really interesting because it was my first time being in a studio, and it was basically this guy's like home studio basement that he turned into his home studio and was like producing part-time. And so it was kind of a fun look into like, an in-between of that like mobile home studio and like a fleshed out professional one. And so, yeah, I think a lot of my music experience has been like with guitar and piano. I had a teacher, or I played in like a school band, but production was definitely the most unstructured one, and that was just a lot of digging and exploring. But that's one of the things that I think I like best about it, is that it is really like, if you have like, once you have a piece of software, it's really accessible. Like, you can teach yourself, you know, from pretty much anywhere, as long as you have like internet connection.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, how would you describe your like music production process? Like, what is it inspired by? Like, does your jazz background kind of pour out sometimes into your production process, or is it more so like, this is what I'm feeling right now, so this is what I'm gonna put in onto the software?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely inspired by my background in jazz and like my background in performance. I think there are a lot of people who take kind of like a programmatic approach, where they're thinking about like loops and drums, and they'll like program it in with MIDI. But I'm usually coming from like a kind of like improvising standpoint, where my production process is like, I'm gonna just kind of jam out on guitar or piano, or like try out some like different drum patterns, and then once I hear something that kind of sticks, then I kind of develop it out. So a lot of the things that I've written have been like just improvisations caught on tape and then like built out into a larger and more like thoughtful piece of music.
Nice.
Yeah, we hear that harmony in the chords.
Yeah.
It's crunchy. It's nice. It's nice. Yeah.
And does your approach to producing for yourself, does that differ from producing for other people, or is that the same?
Yeah, I definitely try and like, that's something that I've thought about a lot, because, you know, like my personal tastes in music are going to, of course, be different than people I'm working with. And if I'm producing for somebody else, like, the priority is to make something that resonates with whatever their creative vision is. And so I don't want my own like inclinations and tastes to get in the way of that. But I also am aware of like, you know, the reason why somebody would be hiring me is because they want like some of my style injected into that. And so figuring out which parts of that are like the things that, you know, I want to inject in it, and which are the parts that like, okay, maybe I should just rein this in, is really important. And I think it differs from like person to person. I've done a lot of like tracking for guitar on like sort of more like pop leaning tracks. And with that kind of thing, you know, I'm not going to like throw in like really crunchy chords and stuff like that. But I know like, you know, people like maybe like my rhythmic approach, or like just like the tone of my guitar and like how I play. So yeah, it's definitely a balancing act. And it's always like, if I'm producing for somebody else, their vision is what comes first. And I'm just trying to use what I know to kind of support that.
Also, let's talk about your experience. You've always been like kind of doing something. Like a lot of the semesters, you've always been finding like different jobs and different opportunities to further yourself and your experience and kind of your sphere. And one of the big goals of this podcast is to take the blueprint of successful students and successful people at Columbia in music, and kind of see what we can draw out of that. And what would you say is something that's contributed to your success?
Yeah, I think definitely always being willing to explore different opportunities, and not like finding them where I'm at and with like what makes sense where I'm at. So say something like my first real like music internship with the Women in Jazz organization was a result of me just like hanging out at WKCR and helping record the episodes for this jazz podcast that they were doing, just because like, you know, I loved jazz and I wanted to hear like cool tracks, and I, you know, was talking to these people and sort of just following that. I think sometimes I definitely struggle with, you know, the feeling of needing to have a plan and like following that plan to a T. But none of the things that I've really done, and none of my like best experiences in music, I think have been things that I've like really excruciatingly planned out in detail. Like working at Spotify was really, really enjoyable and like a really great learning experience. But that was something that I just kind of applied to on a whim and totally forgot about until like March. And I had different plans. I probably wasn't even going to be in New York. Like, and I just decided, okay, like let's just switch it up because this seems like a really interesting learning experience. Yeah. And I think being open to that and being open to exploring, you know, wherever your interest, if it's in music, is it in music production? Is it in singing? Is it in like royalties? Getting really like specific about what kinds of things that are interesting to you and just like following that. Even if it doesn't seem to stick to some like master plan that you've seen laid out before, I think is a really good way to go about it.
And how was it like working at Spotify?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really, really fun. I was an artist and talent relations intern, which meant I was working on the team that would book artists for events. So say like Spotify has a longstanding best new artist party at the Grammys. So like for things like that, or for like pop-ups at like Rolling Loud or other music festivals, or podcasts when certain podcasts want musical guests. And then it also means just like managing relationships with artists and their teams. I talked to a lot of managers, which was a really great learning experience because I could learn about sort of what it is that like really established artists are trying to do in terms of like creating opportunities with streaming. And also learn on the side of the streaming platforms, like what it is that they do and how they're trying to help artists. And yeah, it was definitely a really large learning experience, and just to be like kind of steeped in it seems like there are 100 things happening because the company is so big. And it was cool being on the music team because it was like a large mix of people coming from label side, previous experiences, people coming from other tech companies. And so I think I got like a really just like broad look at, what is the state of music today by being there.
That's super cool. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like being in that position, like being both an artist and then kind of being now in this position in which you're like fully immersed in, I guess, the industry that a lot of people strive to be a part of, like, I don't know, I guess I have two questions for you. Like, do you think working at places like Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, etc., is kind of like the end goal for artists? Or does there exist a world in which artists can just be artists and make their music and do their own thing for a living?
I want
Yeah.
to snap at that real quick.
Because I don't know,
Right.
I feel like from, I don't know, like from the perspective of someone who played an instrument and then kind of like dropped it because it felt as if the music world was really cutthroat, it was
Right,
like about
right.
getting gigs. It was about like who you knew, and I personally wasn't in the place to like seek those things. So I'm wondering just like curious to see like what you think about that, like were there people you met at Spotify that were working in the industry, but then we're like, oh, but like on the side or like on weekends, I'm an artist, I have to be in this position to sustain myself.
Yeah, there were a number of people like that on the music team. There's actually somebody I met one Columbia alum on the music team who was also a jazz concentrator. Oh yeah, I'm a jazz minor as well, as a philosophy major. And so
Is that David, by the way?
Yeah, David Ecker.
Nice.
Yeah, and he's like the indie independent label relations coordinator guy, and he still gigs on weekends. He's a really great pianist. We would jam sometimes during lunch breaks. And yeah, I think there's definitely a lot. I don't know if that's necessarily the goal for a lot of artists. Like, I mean, I think the ideal is that people should be able to live off of their art. And I do think that like streaming too is, there's a lot of questioning going on, and like, is this helping or hurting? And how can we like leverage the kind of like exposure that artists can get from streaming, but still like reward them monetarily for, what they're doing? And like, I definitely came in with, kind of a critical mindset and wanting to just like actually see like what are people trying to help, or like what is the approach. And I think like I came out of it definitely with the belief that there are people inside these kind of places that are really trying to figure out how to help artists. So like, but that there are so many sort of interlocking forces that make it really difficult, where it's like, streaming rates are low, but then like label shares of the rates that are given out are really high. And so there's a lot of people taking a lot of pieces from the artist pie.
Yeah.
That, it's definitely a lot of different factors that make it difficult for artists to make a living.
And when you say artists, we're talking about like smaller independent artists, like
for sure.
The Weeknd's not affected by Spotify
Right,
paying
right.
like 0.005 per stream, So like, what would be your advice to like artists that are putting out music, like, is it more about intention? Like, I'm putting music out because I want to get compensation for it? Or do you think there should be that mindset of I'm putting music out because I want to,
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance those two also?
I mean, I don't think anybody should be trying to put out music for the purpose of like, I'm gonna, rake in cash, because like it should be a labor of love, obviously, because it's, a creative work, but you should be able to feel like you're being compensated for, if you're at a level where you feel like, your work is creating like your work is garnering attention, and like that should be something that, if people are enjoying your work, you should be compensated for that. And so I think the thing that I would recommend people focus on is like how to create like really, really solid relationships with their fans, because the thing that keeps coming up is like, as when at Spotify, people in the music team were like, okay, like, we're trying to figure out how to adapt with like streaming royalties and new models to compensate artists. But while that's happening, what are other ways we can compensate them? We can do fans first, like merch drives. We could like book artists for gigs and pay them, outright. And all of those things are facilitated by having fans who are really willing to like form a relationship with the artist and sort of invest in the artist. So I really think that's like the greatest currency, is having like not necessarily like a lot of people who will listen to your music, but people who are willing to like really engage with you on a deeper level, whether that's like buying a deluxe version of an album on vinyl, or like going to see your show, or advocating for you, like through a Patreon.
Yeah. What's the best way people can support artists like you and other independent artists?
I think the best way is going to shows has always been like the best way for, artists to make money, and like being able to offer these more like in-depth interactions with fans, because like not only does it make them money, it also just like, that's kind of like, I mean, at least for me, like I love playing a show or like sharing my music with other people, and that's also just sort of a currency of its own. It's just like that really fulfills the purpose of creating the music, to connect with other people. So yeah, I'd definitely say going to shows, like in just even interacting with artists, whether it's like on social media, like listening to their stuff, looking at their clips, or like purchasing merch. I think just like being really, really willing to like interact with artists. I think one thing that has resulted from like the amount of music that's being put out and is so accessible, not just through streaming, but like specifically like TikTok, stuff like that, is that your attention span gets really split, and like, you'll like a sound, like it might not even be a song, you'll like a sound, but you can't say like, oh, like I love this artist who's behind this song. It'll be like, I heard this sound and it's really funny and cool, or like it sounds great, but like I don't really have any connection to the artist. And I think continuing to be really, really like conscious and intentional about like building relationships, like in listening relationships with artists rather than just like sounds, is definitely like a great way to support artists.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Just a very beginner question, because I know there's a lot of people in the same boat as me. I've never performed in New York. I have very little performance experience. So I hear about, like booking gigs at Terminal 5. You've played at these places. What's the other one? Kind of downtown, Lower East Side. That a lot
Bowery.
Of yeah,
Bowery.
People. So could you explain how that works? I don't know if this is too simple of a question, but like I literally don't know how it works. Do you call them? Do you get compensation, or do you pay to perform, or do you get a cut of ticket sales? Like, how does that work?
I could actually speak to this as well.
Yeah, Max has a lot of experiences.
Cool.
Yeah, so this summer I got to intern at Gig Finesse, which is a booker in New York City. They're actually in several different cities. I kind of went into this summer like looking for the same thing, because I am also a performer, singer, songwriter in the city, and looking for ways to play shows. And it's actually really simple. They're always looking to fill their calendar. Okay. So I think it's really, they have like an artist application website online, and Gig Finesse is just one example. But you really just have to kind of reach out and make a profile with like your name, your work, and your links, and then reach out to them individually, and kind of just the most important thing is just bringing out people to the show. Right. Most of the time, they don't mind that much about the quality of the music, as long as it's good enough. If you're bringing out like 15 people, 20 people for your show, they'll just want to keep on like booking you at different shows. And as soon as you do one show, you can move kind of past the first booking company and kind of perform at a lot of different venues in the city. It's really like based around ticket sales. And for example, for Gig Finesse, they have a really good ticket sale model. It's like after the first 12 tickets, you get 100% on the rest of the tickets.
Oh, okay.
And like that's better than a lot of different places who will book you, where like they might do, you get 50% of all the ticket sales, and if you only sell like 20, you'll get like a smaller cut, for example.
Right.
But it really is all about the ticket sales and all about promotion, bringing people out, and putting on a good show, of course. But I think the core of it is bringing out people.
Yeah. So you shouldn't have to pay to perform at these places.
Definitely not.
That's a scam.
No,
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
making sure.
yeah,
Okay.
okay,
For all the
cool.
people out there.
1000%.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and I think that was a great overview, Max, of like a lot of these bookers that are kind of facilitating independent musicians and people starting out to be able to play it at really, really cool venues and get compensated. And I also think, like, say if you're like, oh, I want to just like reach out on my own and like, you know, independently and just like hit up different venues. That's like a totally, I had a friend who she decided she wanted to perform in New York City. She moved here last summer and she just would go to every venue in the Lower East Side, like physically like hand them like her like one sheet. It's always good to have like a one sheet that says like, you know, who you are, what's your background, what kind of music do you play, links or like, you know, whatever recordings of what you do, just as like a summary. But she just give her one sheet to everybody, and then just like ask them like, do you have any openings, et cetera, et cetera. And at first it's going to be like, it's always, you're not going to get that much money. Like it's just kind of inevitable.
Right.
But you know, you start playing at certain places and sort of building up a resume of where you have played. And then if you're as like an instrumentalist, a lot of times it's not even like I'm booking directly. It's like, I'm playing for a band that has booked a certain venue, and so I'll be kind of like on call for certain bands. So there's kind of a mix of ways you can do it as like a band leader, where you're approaching venues and trying to like book yourself, and usually like emailing their booking manager, or you can be someone who's sort of on call if you're like an instrumentalist, or like a backup vocalist, or even a vocalist, where you know you get called for a gig by other people who you know are like band leaders.
Right, and I think like being kind of the hired hand, like the hired musician, the guitarist or the backup vocalist, you can kind of do like any amount of shows, I think, right?
Yeah.
But like if you're booking the show, one core lesson I've learned this summer is like you can only do really a show like every 4 weeks, because you really have to pull your fan base out, promote it, make sure it's perfect, because you don't want to like set up a show when you only bring 4 people out, for example, because that kind of reflects poorly on your future shows. But again, like performing with other bands and unticketed shows, for example, like performing at a restaurant or a cafe, you can do as many of those as you'd like, I think.
Okay. Good advice.
And there's different approaches too, which I think is something that's really interesting is with booking. Like if you're booking, you know, a performance oriented venue, they might do a mix of like door plus ticket cut. A lot of times that's how it is. But then like a flat fee plus however many tickets. So there's some like tie to like how many people you're bringing in. But a lot of places like restaurants, you know, they're not going to like be like, oh, we had X amount of people eat here tonight, you get like this cut, and those are usually like flat. So like coffee shop gigs a lot of times are just like flat rate, and then they let you have tips. And yeah, so there's a lot of different approaches depending on the setting too. Or like any private gig, they're not going to do any sort of sliding. It's just like here is. And actually like for jazz musicians, like I feel like the jazz community is like probably financially sustained like 50% by like weddings and like private gigs. Like weddings are always like the big money makers. It's not like the prestigious gig at like Smalls or like the Village Vanguard. It's like, yes, you go there because like, you know, people will like really appreciate your music, and there's like a high standard of like craftsmanship that is required to, you know, be playing there. But if you're just trying to pay your bills, you're going to go play a wedding in New Jersey where they pay you like $700, they feed you, like you go and you come back and it's like, you know, you just play like whatever, you know, people enjoy. And yeah, so there's also that kind of aspect of it is where there's a lot of different kinds of models for payment, and depending on the kind of performance, it might not even be like a performance in the traditional sense. It might be like background music or like ambience or, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess just while we're on the topic, like corporate events.
Right.
He was talking about like how all of his friends do kind of session work and are barely making enough money to pay rent. Whereas like him working with the corporate gigs is like the most sustainable, financially viable type of method. And so would you say like that is something you're interested in doing personally, or like you would recommend? Because it's interesting how like that's kind of set up.
Yeah, I think like one thing I learned, there is a really, really amazing saxophonist from my hometown named Adam Larson, who's like very reputed, very well known in the jazz scene. And like when I was going off to school, I was like just talking to him about like, gigging and stuff like that. He's like, yes, like you'll gig, but if you're trying to like make a living as a musician, you'll also have to have a mix of stream of incomes. And so like to have the most safety and the most support, it probably won't be, it's very likely it won't be 100% performing in the traditional like venue gigs, because there's a time limit on like how many you could play. There's a lot of factors that can complicate how much you're making. But he would be like teaching lessons, doing gigs, doing more like corporate gigs, like or like wedding, private events, etc. Like arranging. I think there's always going to be, right now as it stands, a need to diversify your sort of approach and the ways that you're using art to make income. I know before it was easier to make money off of performances, before like certain ticket monopolies came into play, and that the live music scene has really like kind of been shaken up over and over again. But I definitely think that kind of like diversified approach to music is the best way to like make money doing it.
Right. That's really cool to hear about. Yeah.
And I feel like the pandemic really like showed that too, like with the closing of a lot of music venues in New York, and also artists kind of like being forced inside and not having that audience to perform for, but I don't know, I'm curious to know if like you think that idea of musicians are going to have multiple streams of income in order to like sustain their craft. Like, is that something we should normalize?
I don't think it should be normalized in the sense that like musicians should be like, having to have 10 hustles and like really like work like crazy, like burnout weeks in order to just like survive off of creating art. Like in the ideal world, musicians could all be able to sustain themselves on like a mix of like performance and recording. But at the same time, there's so many people in music that there's a lot of variety of like, how serious certain people are. And like, it wouldn't necessarily make sense. Like it wouldn't be realistic for everybody who's just like recording, something on like a voice memo on their iPod to be able to like, like rake it in.
Hey, but why not though?
I know, it would be great. That would be the dream. That would be the dream. And I think that would be ideal. But obviously there's certain limitations just with how many musicians there are and how many ears there are. But I think that the big kind of struggle and the kind of like formative things happening in the music industry now will be figuring out how to like, what is that mix of like performance versus recording versus this and that, that will let musicians be able to like survive in a sustainable way. Because I think there's merit to having those multiple streams of income or like those multiple approaches to music, because like it is great to perform and maybe some people want to make their living off of performing, but maybe people find a lot of joy in like, in these like teaching or like session work. And like I personally like really enjoy session work and recording, and like I like to perform, but I also just find it really exhausting. And I think there's a lot of merits to like shedding more light and putting more focus on these other avenues of surviving off of your art that aren't just like being like the touring musician. And I don't think it should be like the necessary thing to survive is to have 100 different hustles, but I think there's a lot of worth in highlighting the different sides and the different ways you can make money off of music, like sync for producers or licensing. Just because, if there's going to be so much interest in using music in like media, in like TV, then, musicians might as well be empowered to like take advantage of those avenues. Course.
So we can kind of conclude that there's like no one right way to do music.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice.
What's been like the most insane, like this was like a crazy gig, like, or this was a crazy recording session, or this person was just like so amazing to work with, like story that you have to tell?
Let's see.
Wow us.
Yeah, literally.
I'm trying to think what.
Or like, has there been a moment that's been like, wow, that was like an amazing like collaboration. Like I want to keep doing this.
I think, let's see. I think I've had some really, really fun last minute gigs. Like I've had a lot of playing in the park during COVID really like revived my like passion and interest, I think, in music, because there was really no reason for us to really be doing all that, like sitting in the park for hours playing, trying to get like old people to give us like dollar bills. Yeah. But it was just such a fun like communal experience. And I think those times have been like really, really like just really, really fulfilling and kind of fueling. And stuff like, honestly, this year, trying to invigorate the presence of like music on campus through Bacchanal and through Mike. We had our sort of like flea market with music this past Saturday, and we booked a lot of different performers with Mike's help and with Max's help. And it was a lot of people who like had been playing different venues, but some of them like really wanted to like get more involved in gigging, and being able to give them that opportunity and like seeing their friends come out and be really, really excited to just like share that kind of moment with them is really exciting. So I think the things that I'm most excited about are these places where we can just like broaden the ways we're sharing music on campus.
Yeah, and it's really beautiful to hear you say that as well, like knowing your history of performing at bigger venues and with different artists. Like your favorite thing was performing in the park and like bringing more music to your campus. Like, yeah, it's really nice to hear.
Yeah, and I think the work that Bacchanal too is doing to kind of bring in all these artists together is like really amazing. And I feel like it really tries to like create that community that the university doesn't really have a role in facilitating.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this year.
Awesome. I just wanted to kind of ask, going back to the beginning of your journey, coming to Columbia, were you thinking about music programs as well, like maybe Berkeley or NYU Clive Davis, or were you always kind of set on like going the academic route? And also like in retrospect, like how you feel about the decision?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, and like I did look at schools with like music programs. I was really, really close to going to USC because they had like the music production, Thornton, and music industry stuff. I have a lot of friends over there who have like really thrived in that environment. So sometimes I'm like, man, like maybe that would have been the right path. But like I think now that I know that I'm going to be going into music, and you know, probably for a very long time and in a very like, you know, sustained way, like I'm happy that I chose somewhere that's not all music, because I do know like my friends in conservatories, that's, you know, they kind of live, breathe, eat music all the time, and like, you know, their coursework is about it, like their whole social circle is also tied up in like their, you know, gigging life, and there's an intensity about that I think can be really exciting and really, really like healthy for people who have just been like waiting for that opportunity and like kind of slugging through school, not really enjoying it, and wanting to just like finally be able to focus on music. But I always really liked school too, and I've also found like the things that I'm reading or the things that, you know, I'm absorbing like through school intellectually, like always inform my music. And I think that's also been something that a pattern that I found in like my favorite artists, is that they have lived very like full, not like that they like are like big school people, but that they just are big, like curious and like introspective and reflective kinds of people. So like say like Frank Ocean, of course, has had a lot of like ventures into like design and art and like writing with magazines, and like people like No Name, for example, is deep into like abolitionist literature. And I like one of my favorite experiences musically was going to No Name's book club.
You were posted on No Name's Instagram. Yeah, I totally remember that.
It was like such an amazing experience, and she was such a kind person, and like clearly like just really invested in her community, really like wanting to create cool art, but like also just learn about like what's going on in the world. And I think that like that's something that, you know, also can like doing like music stuff can be kind of hard and kind of like it's a grind, and I think it's also good to just like be able to step away and like and think about other things, but also combine, you know, that like curiosity about the world and that sort of introspection with, you know, a way to express it too, and an outlet to be able to express the things that you're absorbing and kind of mulling through. So I'm ultimately really glad that, you know, I came here and found a lot of really great people too to do, and a lot of people who are doing the same kind of things, like balancing a lot of different interests and hobbies and passions. And I think that being around so many like really multifaceted and people has been really inspiring for me too.
That's awesome. So I do have two more final questions, but I want to open the floor. Like, I don't want to take all the remaining time. If anyone has questions as well.
Maybe you were gonna ask this, maybe like what you were looking forward to, like
Yeah,
what your
exactly.
next steps.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm working on a single right now that I'm hoping to release
Nice.
next month.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm super excited that it's very like Eloise, Lizzie McAlpine kind
Let's
of
go.
inspired, but still with the harmony like that kind of like Maxwell-y brass tracks harmony. So I'm hoping, you know,
Touching all the bases right now.
yeah, I know that's what I've been kind of trying to work on, finding something where I can like really mix all those influences that I've been kind of soaking in the past year, while working with all these different people. So that I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to, you know, more shows, more things on campus, and
Post grad, like that's not the
post grad. I don't know.
Big
I
question.
honestly don't know. I'm definitely excited to just like, I don't know, kind of jump into the music industry stuff and explore it more. And I feel like I had like a great crash course with Spotify, and I am really curious and hopeful to try and start figuring out how to use the things that I've learned there to like really tackle that question of like compensation for musicians. Because there's a lot of really cool things that are like starting to pop up. There's this thing called Marine Snow, which is like it's like a listening platform for musicians that like compensates them on it's like a flat rate for their releases, and then audiences can like buy in to like having their names like on the albums, and it's like a really interesting model
Wow.
for like super fans, stuff like that, or like startups like AudioMac, which are like 100% royalties towards artists and like a lot of sync opportunities. I think there's a lot of really cool innovations happening that are geared towards, you know, making a really sustainable, even like YouTube, the Creator Fund, and the music creator platform for sync. I think it's a really exciting time. So I'm also super curious to explore all of that as well.
nice.
That's exciting.
I guess I wanted to say before asking this question, like, it's really great to hear from your experience that you didn't always have a master plan. You didn't always know you're going to be at Spotify. Didn't always know you're going to do all these different things. As someone myself who is also like at Columbia, where it's so open and there's so many possibilities open to us, I think it's going to be great for a lot of students in the same boat to hear. And so in that vein, I wanted to ask, what advice would you give to Columbia students starting their journey or already in their journey on navigating music, the industry, anything from your experience that you wish you'd known and that you'd like to impart?
Yeah. So I think I definitely say like really be true to your interests and don't let what other people are doing sway you. I feel like by following my interest in like jazz and like my interest in like the community of women in jazz, that led me down like a really interesting path. And at Artist Share, where Artist Share's platform was sort of like fan funded albums. So like fans would buy an album and then get access to a lot of content that would be released as the album was developed, sort of like behind the scenes. And that was like pre Kickstarter and pre Patreon. And so like I kind of like got led down this really interesting path of like creative ways to compensate artists, like small labels, but like using tech too, and that, and then like indie label stuff at AWOL, and then yeah, I think I kind of just followed things that like I found interesting and that spoke to like a very specific part of my interest in music, whether it was jazz or like independent music or interesting models of like funding artistry, and I think that's one of the great things about music is that there's so many different ways to interact with it, whether it's A&R, sync, licensing, publishing, law, royalties. There's really something for any kind of skill set. I think it's just a matter of like figuring out where you fit and where that makes sense for you. And then I think the other big thing is just finding communities of people who will really support your artistry and make you feel, you know, valued, regardless of what you do. I think that's super important. And I've been able to find that on campus, and I've found that a lot with the people who I play music with, and that's what's kept me going.
And you've also been kind of building that with Bacchanal and like the changes to Bacchanal and Mike. So definitely supporting artists.
That's what I think we're both trying to do.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for coming here today, Steph and Armand, Max and Chandler. It was an amazing time, like just like hearing about the insight that you have. I'm sure a lot of people are excited to like hear about it. I know I'm thankful for this experience.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
No, yeah, it's so nice having people back in the studio at WKCR. But yeah, we're gonna just close it out now.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening in, for tuning in. We'll be posting these podcast episodes every Thursday night. So stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Support the Patreon.